Well, welcome to our community. Susie Thomas with you this morning. Very happy to welcome back Sharon Snowden from the Daughters of the American Revolution, DAR. Well, we're going to be talking about something really special today. Good morning, Sharon.
Good morning, Susie.
So I didn't realize that 1920, 2020 to this year is the 100th anniversary of what?
They are celebrating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote.
1920. Now, it started, the whole plan of trying to make this happen started far earlier than 1920. About how long were women saying to their husbands, how come I don't get to vote?
Yes. Well, you know what, Susie, it's interesting that you brought that up because we can go all the way back to 1776.
I would think.
And we had Abigail Adams, who wrote in her letter to her husband, John, and if I may, I'd like to quote that.
Please.
I long to hear that you have declared an independency, and, by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation.
Oh, my. Abigail. She said it, didn't she?
She did, yes.
How did they ignore that?
Well, you know, his response in a letter to her was a more playful tone. And he says, I cannot but laugh. You are so saucy.
Oh.
But I think that, you know, in the contents of what was going on at the time, he wasn't so much concerned with gender as he was with independency. And somebody that, you know, did not own property, for example, was dependent on others. And therefore, you know, they might be influenced to vote a certain way, you know, as opposed to somebody who was independent on their own. So
certainly he could tell she meant business, though.
Yes. Oh, yes. Abigail was a strong woman.
And what I understand is they were quite a team in building this new country.
Yes, absolutely. You know, and, you know, in September we also celebrate the 233rd anniversary of our Constitution. So, like I say, you're going back 1776.
Yeah.
You know, as early as that. So,
well, they did some things back then that we have needed to correct since, but they did a lot right, didn't they, in putting this all together?
Right. And if we, you know, go on the timeline of this women's suffrage in the United States, it wasn't until, now several of the states had women, they were able to vote if, you know, they were head of the household, but they were only able to vote in certain elections. It wasn't just a wide, broad stroke that they could vote in every election.
When did that start? I didn't realize that.
Yes, it was even in 1780, 1787, when the Constitution was written, they voted in certain areas, but then it got to the point where, you know, men thought, well, women were going to vote for the best-looking candidate.
What?
And this wasn't fair. And some men dressed up as women so they could vote twice. So they took the vote away from the women. And, you know, but it was only if they could, you know, they couldn't own property.
Women were not allowed to own property?
No, they weren't. In fact, if they inherited property from their father, when they were married, it would belong to the husband.
I remember in Downton Abbey when that happened. Lady Mary wasn't able.
Yes. And then,
yes.
You know, if the husband died, then the woman, you know, was the owner. But, you know, it was, you know, a lot of restrictions on the men, and on the women in that era. And
so was that basically it, Sharon, that it had something to do with property ownership? Because other than that, it doesn't make sense, to me anyway. Why on earth would they be afraid to have women vote?
Right. And like I say, they were afraid women weren't aware of the issues. A lot of the anti-suffragist, organizations, they believed the woman's place was in the home, and that it was only up to the husband to make those decisions. So there were women who thought that women shouldn't vote.
There is a great line in My Big Fat Greek Wedding where the mom says to the daughter, yes, the man is the head, but the woman is the neck. Yeah. And the neck turns the head whichever direction she wants to. Was that happening as men were voting? Were women getting their digs in and making their knowledge known, actually how much aware of the issues they were and what they felt about them?
Well, I think so. And even if we go to presidential elections, when they started the town halls, like President William McKinley, he would hold town halls just for the women in the area. And women couldn't vote at that time.
Right.
But he felt they had a strong influence on their husbands.
Somebody said they think some of the candidates this year are going for the 12 to 15 age group. Even though they can't vote, they might have some influence on their parents. Let's go back to the timeline, because I really want to get a sense of how this all happened. So it goes all the way back to founding the country.
Right.
Breaking away from England, getting away from that whole Downton Abbey thing. However, bringing along with it some of the things that were restrictive over there.
Right. It wasn't until 1838, whenever Kentucky passes the first statewide women's suffrage law, allowing female just the heads of households in rural areas to vote and on issues that decided on taxes and common school system.
So that was it. Those two things, women were allowed to have an opinion.
Right. And then it was like 10 years later, 1848, now that's when it really starts to happen, because there was the Seneca Falls Convention. It was the first women's rights convention held in Seneca Falls, New York. And these ladies, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, started this organization. They had speeches, and they had even Frederick Douglass, as a speaker. And they were, trying to get votes. There were a lot of abolitionists in that at that time, too. So they were speaking. So this is when it really got started, and took hold. Then it was like 1850, they had a First National Women's Rights Convention in Massachusetts that attracts more than 1,000 participants.
My goodness.
Yes. So, but this was along, like I say, it forms with the abolitionist movement, Frederick Douglass, Lucy Stone, Sojourner Truth. They're all in attendance. Now,
and let me interrupt you there, right
Sure.
there. Even going back to Abigail Adams' letter, people had such a command of the language right then. And when you think of what those speeches must have sounded like, there you have Frederick Douglass, one of the great orators of ever. And some of these, Lucretia Mott and Cady Stanton, and what we read of what they said is so powerful. Right.
And it was like a year later then, 1851, they had a women's rights convention right here in Akron, Ohio. And this is where Sojourner Truth, so she was born a slave, but she was, gained her freedom, and she delivered her famous speech, Ain't I a Woman?
Yes.
And
these are the speeches that we've had to memorize in the 4th grade. I really can't think of any lately that I would ask a 4th grader to memorize of elected officials. I'm going to get in so much trouble for saying that, but do I make a point?
Right.
These are speeches worth memorizing.
Right. And, I want to go over some of these ladies from Ohio that had a part in this, because it's very important. Since we are in Ohio, you never really hear about the women in Ohio. Now, there was a Florence Allen from Cleveland, and there was a Hallie Quinn Brown, and she was actually helped found the National League of Colored Women in 1896. And then we had Eliza Archer Connor, who was a journalist, and Belle Sherwin from Cleveland. How about this one? Pauline Steinem from Toledo. She's the grandmother of the well-known feminist leader Gloria Steinem.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes.
Wow.
And then
there's something in the DNA there.
Yes. Harriet Taylor Upton. Now, she is quite popular in the Warren area. She led the Ohio Women's Suffrage Association and organized the suffrage parade of over 5,000 supporters in Columbus in 1912, before the special election.
And you really bring up such a good point that so many of these women were really fighting on two fronts, that you had abolition and women's suffrage going on at the same time.
Right.
And abolition happened first, and then women's suffrage still had a couple of decades to go.
Right, yeah, when you think about it. And, like Harriet Taylor Upton, her home is still over in Warren, and it's a historical landmark, of course. So,
yes.
Where she lived. Now, during the Civil War, most of the suffragists, they focused on the war effort. So their activity was minimal at that time. But then in 1866, we had the American Equal Rights Association that was formed by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Still those people, today that we know.
Those are the names I really know, yeah.
Right. And then in 1868, we had Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Parker Pillsbury.
I have not heard that name.
Published the first edition of The Revolution. And in it they quote, "Men their rights and nothing more, women their rights and nothing less."
Oh,
so
again, don't they know how to turn a phrase, don't they?
Yes.
My goodness. If you're saying, okay, here's my math on the fly. If you're saying that Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, they were working that long ago,
right?
And 1920 is when it happened. Did they get to see this happen?
No.
Neither?
Susan B. Anthony died in 1906, I believe. Yes, I think she died in 1906.
So neither lived to see it happen.
Carrie Chapman Chatt was very popular in this movement as well, and she did. She was one of the ones that actually, did the legwork and went for the votes in the different states. So she was, of course, alive in 1920. Now we had, now something else. We had a Carolyn Severance, who establishes the first New England Women's Club. This is called the Mother of Clubs, and this is 1868. So you can see here, like I say, the Daughters of the American Revolution was formed in 1890.
Wow,
so it still took time, but a lot of clubs were formed. This was called the Mother of Clubs. Now we had 1868, though, we had a senator from Kansas that introduces the Federal Woman's Suffrage Amendment in Congress. Of course, it gets, voted down.
And that year again was?
1868.
Wow, okay.
But we did get the 14th Amendment at that time, and that was that all persons born or naturalized are U.S. citizens.
Mm-hmm.
So that came about. Susan B. Anthony felt that gave her the right to vote.
Sure, all citizens.
Yeah, it's all citizens, but it was the first time that the word male was introduced into the Constitution.
Oh. So because was she kind of cute about it? Did she just show up one day at the polls? And
she did. She voted for Ulysses S. Grant. and she was
That's kinda cool.
put on trial.
Oh, you're
And
kidding.
she lost her case, of course, but she never paid the $100 fine.
Oh, my.
Now, interestingly enough, 1869, Wyoming was the first one to grant this full, unrestricted suffrage to women. Wyoming. Now, you wonder why they did that, okay?
Yes.
Because they had a lot of men out there. They felt if they gave the women the right to vote, it would attract more women to come to Wyoming.
Oh, my goodness. Here come the brides.
Yes.
Oh, my
Yes.
goodness.
So then we had 1869 also. We had the National Woman Suffrage Association and the American Woman Suffrage Association. They split because some people like Lucy Stone and were different than Susan B. Anthony and Stanton.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted, they were more abolitionists.
Mm-hmm.
So they split into these two movements. Now, interestingly enough, Utah follows suit with granting suffrage to all women.
So it was happening out west first.
Right. All the western states,
Sure.
gave suffrage to the women.
This is so interesting. We are visiting with Sharon Snowden, finding all about how we women got the right to vote 100 years ago. We'll be back after these words. You're listening to Our Community. Welcome back to Our Community. Susie Thomas visiting with Sharon Snowden from the DAR, and we're finding all about the 19th Amendment. This is the 100th anniversary. Women have been allowed to vote for only 100 years of our country's history. But I think what's so interesting is the women's vote. You can't say that women's vote is one thing because women are like men. We're going to have lots of different opinions. You have, women on the right, women on the left, women in the middle, and center left, center right, all kinds of combinations and different issues that mean most to different of us. So it's hard to talk about the women's vote as a lump, isn't it?
Pardon, I'm sorry.
Isn't it hard to talk about the women's vote in one clump?
Oh, yes. Yes, because it took so many women, in different areas of the country to get this going. And it was like 1870 now they passed they adopted the 15th Amendment, which gave the right of the citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Now, wouldn't you think that at that point,
previous condition of servitude, I would have argued, got me in there. Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and then we had the first woman who, runs for president, Victoria Woodhull, 1871. Okay, she says that she's able to vote under these amendments, but nobody agrees. Okay,
wow.
She is, in the House of Representatives.
And was it the language specifically that they said, no, the way we've worded this still keeps you out?
I think that the men felt they didn't need any words, that it was just a no.
Just understood.
Just a no vote, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because I have not seen anything on that, and, exactly what their wording was, why they voted against it.
And before we continue, let me just ask you, did women ever dress up like men and show up? Because you wouldn't have had a driver's license at the time, and I'm not sure how you proved who you were.
It could be, and maybe it went undetected. Because
they did to fight in the Civil War.
Yeah, right, and in the Revolution, too.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be, and they were just not, it was not known at the time, it could be that they did dress up like men, because a lot of women did do that to get other, things like in the war effort.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, let you continue.
Okay, then in 1871, we had the Anti-Suffrage Society is formed. Now, this is men and women both. I mean, the women just felt that the woman's place was in the home and that should not be, disturbed, that the husband should have the right to vote, only. So
Mm-hmm.
there was an anti-suffrage movement as well.
So
And
some
we get
men were
into
coming
that.
along.
Yeah, we get into that later. They form another one where all the wealthy business owners, the breweries, the liquor people, they didn't want the women to have the vote because they felt, they would vote against the liquor.
They believed women would vote more along temperance.
Right.
So
Right.
they wanted to deny them that vote.
Right. Now, here we get in 1872, this is when Susan B. Anthony registers and votes for Ulysses S. Grant in Rochester, New York.
I love it.
Yes, arguing that the 14th, 15th Amendment give her that right.
Yes.
She's arrested a few days later. Now, 15 other women are arrested for illegally voting as well. Sojourner Truth goes to a polling booth in Michigan demanding a ballot, and she is turned away. And Victoria Woodhull, the first female to run for president, is nominated by the Equal Rights Party with a platform supporting women's suffrage. So, that goes a long way. We got, people in Oregon, in the state of Oregon, they fight. It's Abigail Scott Dunway. She fights for rights for women to own and operate their own business. I mean, women couldn't even do that.
My goodness.
And controlling the money she earns. All the
of it.
money went to the husband. So,
Think of it.
yes. And like I say, then later, Susan B. Anthony was fined and never paid $100.
How did she get away with that?
I don't know. They
Just
probably
make me-
thought, "Oh, just let her go." You know how they did.
Well, the one thing, too, and before I let you continue, too, I'm sorry I keep interrupting you, but I've got so many questions.
Yeah.
It just seems that they were able to do this so peacefully. I know that violence was shown to many of them, or at least disrespect was shown to many of them, but it seems that the women themselves really went about this pretty peacefully. Do I have that right?
Well, some of them.
Some
did.
of them, okay.
Yes, because see, over in England, they were much more radical. The women were much more radical about wanting the vote. Well, Alice Paul, who we'll get to in a minute, she spent time over there, so she brought these ideas back, and she and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Carrie Chapman, they did not get. They were not on the same page because they felt they could go in and do legwork in the communities, in the states, and get their vote, where she used more radical policies and everything. And there is even they were. Well, let me get to that. Okay.
Yes. I'll let you get to that.
Because we have 1875 women in Michigan and Minnesota win the right to vote in school elections.
Okay. Little bit, just pecking away at it.
In 1880, New York State grants school suffrage to women, again on the schools. In 1883, though, Washington Territory, they grant full voting rights, again, out west.
Yeah.
Okay. Then in 1884, the House of Representatives debate women's suffrage, and it is voted down, defeated 2-1 in the U.S. Senate.
Really?
Yes. And then in Kansas, the women win the right to vote in municipal elections. Okay. Then we have the National Council of Women is established in 1888. And this is to promote the advancement of women in society. Now,
was that to appease women when they're asking for the vote and say no, but we'll give you a National Council of Women?
Right. and the clubs
and women's clubs,
right? Mm-hmm. And the DAR was formed because the SAR, the Sons of the American Revolution, would not permit women to join. So.
And look which one you hear about today.
Yes. We do a lot of things in the community.
Absolutely.
Well, in 1888, Wyoming insists on maintaining the suffrage if they're going to join the Union.
Oh.
So they were really upfront in that. So
that starts pressing the issue.
Yes. And then in 1890, we have this NAWSA that formed, the National American Women's Suffrage Association. And the first president is, of course, Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the American Federation of Labor declares some support for women's suffrage in 1890 as well. So that is a feather in their cap. Now, in 1894, though, despite 600,000 signatures, a petition for women's suffrage is ignored totally in New York. Okay. Then we have Idaho grants women full suffrage.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then we have Carrie Chapman Catt. She begins to write this National Suffrage Bulletin. And in it, one of her quotes I'd like to read is, "In the adjustment of the new order of things, we women demand an equal voice.
Mm-hmm.
We shall accept nothing less."
Getting a little more forceful.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And she, like I say, she did a lot of, she'd go into the states and really promote, the right for women to vote. And like I say, 1906, now we get into the 20th century.
Yes.
1906, Susan B. Anthony dies. And she's buried in Rochester, New York. Now, to this date, if you go on, look up some of the pictures of her tombstone, women go out to her tombstone and put their "I voted" sticker on it.
Oh,
and
still to this day?
Yes.
That's neat.
So, and then we had, in 1908, there was like the first march in California that they marched down Broadway, 300 women for equal suffrage, and the California Republicans would not put that in their platform. They rejected it.
My goodness.
It wasn't until Teddy Roosevelt in his Bull Moose Party that he supported women's suffrage on the national level.
Wow. And let's remind, I think in this area, everyone knows he was William McKinley's vice president. So
Right.
Hard to even believe that during William McKinley's campaigning, women didn't vote. But so
Right.
started to pick up speed with his vice president once he became president.
Right. And like I say, even William McKinley would hold, town halls for just women.
Yes,
they could
that's
not
neat.
vote.
Yeah, even though they couldn't vote. He knew they had influence, though.
Yes, so now things start to happen. 1912, Oregon, Arizona, Kansas, Alaska's territory grants women's suffrage. Now, in 1913, Alice Paul, who I talked about earlier, she, had been in England, and she came back with some of the radical ideas of this militant branch of, so they kind of split.
Okay.
Now, in 1913, though, she organizes this parade in Washington, D.C. on the eve of Woodrow Wilson's inauguration. Well, they're attacked by mob, and hundreds of women are injured, but there's no arrests, no nothing at that time. Now, it would be till later, 1914, Nevada and Montana, they give their women's suffrage.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was 1915, are you ready for this? 40,000 march in a New York City parade.
Yes.
And they're dressed in white, carrying their placards with the names of the states they represent.
Mm.
So then, in 1916, though, is whenever Alice Paul and Carrie Chapman Catt, they have their differences. So they're separated into the NAWSA, and then Alice Paul is the National Woman's Party. Now, Woodrow Wilson, he's, inaugurated. Now, he originally opposes women's suffrage when he took office in 1913. But by 1918, he would change his stance. And because the women's role in society continued to change with their involvement in World War I, and so he would actually go to the Senate and voice his approval for the women's rights, the 19th Amendment.
Mm-hmm. So we are so running out of time. How did we get from that to where we are? into 1920 anyway.
Into 1920. Okay, so it was in 1920 we had all the western states, of course, had suffrage. Then there were few in the southern part, in northeast, that would not ratify this amendment. It was Tennessee who had the final say, because we needed 3/4 of the states to ratify. And how Tennessee became the 36th to ratify on August 18th was because they were doing all this legwork. Carrie Chapman Catt was down there. The anti-suffragists were there, all lobbying for this vote. And it was Harry T. Burns, a 24-year-old legislator, who was set to vote against the amendment. However, his mother convinced him to vote for it.
So, I love it. Listen to your mother.
So that was whenever it was ratified, and the 48-48 tie was broken, and it was ratified August 18th, 1920, formally adopted by proclamation of the Secretary of State, Colby, on August 26, 1920. And he would not have Carrie Chapman Catt or Alice Paul come and witness it, even though they wanted to, because he felt there was so much dissension between them that it would, overshadow the signing of it and everything.
So that was August the 18th.
Right.
In 1 week, we will celebrate the 100th anniversary of the amendment. What a good history lesson this has been. Sharon Snowden, thank you so much for bringing all this information to us today on Our Community.
Well, you're quite welcome. And it was interesting to research all this because, we had no idea it started way back with Abigail. I mean, we always hear Remember the Ladies, but it actually started there.
Yes, thank you.
You're quite welcome.